welcome again to another Feature Friday, and my name is Guy Bartram. I'm Director of Product Marketing for our Cloud Director suite of products, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Colotti from Cohesity. So Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, great to see you again, Guy. My Chris Colotti, Cohesity. I'm a field CTO here with the company. I've been here about 2 years, just over 2 years now. Obviously came from VMware many years ago. So
Yeah.
it's actually cool to be back on. It's like, wow, some of the stuff we're talking about, I goes way back for me. So
Well, it's like Hotel California, right? You can leave, but you can never escape.
that's right.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you very much for your time today. And, we really want to dive into what Cohesity can provide for our service provider partners, but particularly focus on the VCD integration that you guys have. So let's take it from the top. Let's just do a very brief intro into what Cohesity is and what it's all about for those who don't know it, and then we'll
Yeah.
dive into the integration.
Yeah, so Cohesity is really what's now considered a data management platform, right? It has its roots in its history in backup and recovery, but as it's evolved over the last couple of years, even since I've been here, we've really moved more towards that, data management or even data management as a service, and we talk more about the platform itself. So it's still, we have a lot of customers that are still using it for traditional backup and recovery, but it's growing more and more into file services and other pieces and parts that we're doing with the platform. Mohit's vision really was to start in one place, kind of like, all these companies, even VMware, they started with a hypervisor, and now there's all these other things, right,
Oh
that the
yeah,
company
yeah.
does. So, but you got to have that initial focus. But that's really the 30-second, what Cohesity does from a product perspective.
Okay, take me through. Sorry, just take me through data management as a service. What does that actually mean?
Oh, that's a new thing. It's basically taking our platform, running it on a cloud provider, that we actually own the tenant and actually provide some of the services that we do on premises through as a service. So, backup as a service, DR as a service, but we're actually hosting it, we're managing it, but it's still our software platform that's running in our tenant versus, on a customer's tenant or inside a customer on premises.
Oh,
So
okay,
it's
okay.
it's 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 actually, it just got announced a couple weeks ago during AWS reInvent. Actually, last year it was announced, but there's actually a free trial out there for it.
Okay, cool, excellent. Well, let's talk about the functionality that's exposed in VCD then. So, what's available
Yes.
to providers from the VCD integration?
So it's funny because when you and I started talking, I think what we learned was not a lot of people know that we actually have direct integration with
Yeah,
VCD.
yeah,
And when I came here, there's another guy by the name of John Hildebrand, who some of the folks watching may know from the community. He worked for a service provider for a while. He was the first one who kind of started with it, and then as it's evolved, I've gotten more involved in it because of my history with VCD, going back to when VMware launched the product. And we showed it off last year. We really displayed it not last year at VMworld because it was virtual the year before. And yeah, now I'm losing track, right, of
it's
when we've
blurring
been in
into one,
person.
isn't
Yeah.
it?
And what was really cool is we built a really good infrastructure to demo it, and it got a lot of traction at VMworld from the service providers because they didn't know. They literally didn't know we
Yeah,
had it. So what Cohesity does is we have the ability on our platform to separate it and make the Cohesity platform multi-tenant capable. So it's basically a switch you turn on, and now you can do organizations and all this other stuff within our platform. What we did that's really interesting, and we'll show in the demo, is we map all of that to what's existing in VCD. So
right.
essentially, if you've got an org or an organization in Cloud Director and you build an org in Cohesity, you can map the two of them. And then once
Okay.
they're mapped, what really makes it unique is the service provider can essentially set certain parameters within the Cohesity side, like which policies. So for example, let's say they always give every customer gold, silver, bronze. We always use that example, right?
Mhm.
And that comes with their service provider model. They can push that to every tenant globally, right? And say, okay, now every tenant who's tied into VCD gets the same access to that. But then they may have, a different customer that says, well, these are great, but I want something I want to pay specific for. They
Yeah.
can create a custom policy and only push that policy to that org and that tenant. So it's very flexible from the service provider's perspective. From the tenant side, it's all about self-service. So what we enable in the HTML5 UI is the ability for the tenant to actually go in based on everything the providers push down to them and do their own backups, their own restores, their own test recoveries, everything that they would normally have to call a service provider to say, hey, I got to go.
Yeah.
Can you go give me a copy of this VM? So it's, with my history with VCD, when I first saw it, I was like, this is actually really cool. like
Hmm.
because the whole idea is self-service, right? You want the
Yeah.
tenant to do their own thing.
Yeah. So it's kind of like when you're doing VCD site pairing then, and you're doing the customer org pairing, so customers can hop across from different VCD instances into the same org on a different site. Similar sort of thing, right? You got to create. Do you have to actually create the org in Cohesity, or is that something that can be
Yes.
automated as an onboarding?
We do have to create it, but we are an API driven company. So everything was built through the APIs. So providers can use PowerShell or other tools to actually
Right.
pre-create the orgs. Like all those calls are there. We usually just show it through the web UI. But yeah, you create it first, then you map it. We can bring in the AD environment, or we can map the AD infrastructure for org authentication. We'll even show the cross launch capability. So if the tenant actually does need to go into the Cohesity backend for any reason, they can directly, to your point, they can launch directly from VCD out, as long as
Right.
the
Yeah, I
the
was going to ask
providers
that.
actually
Yeah.
exposed it. So, and they still have a limited view, but they can't edit policies, for example, but they can do everything around backup jobs and functions and what I call operator type functions
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
backend.
The stuff you want to do at high scale, but not, any tuning involved necessarily, or mild
Yeah.
personalization.
What I think we found from the service provider perspective is it's freed up their operations. The customers using both, it's freed their operations teams up.
Yeah.
So the advantage to the provider is they don't have to take all the calls to just say, hey, can you go restore this file? And or can you restore this VM, or can you restore the VApp? They don't get that anymore because they've enabled the self-service. They can train the customer and say, hey, you've got access to all of this. If you run into a
Yeah.
problem or something doesn't seem to work, then give us a call.
So how much of the functionality would you say is in the VCD native integration with the HTML5 UI versus what's in Cohesity for a tenant?
For tenant, I'd say it's well over 90% of the functions that they could do directly in the back end through the HTML5 UI. We expose all of the snapshot history. You will see it in the demo.
Yeah.
I haven't really found a reason when I demo it to go over to the other side, other than to show the cross launch feature. Because you can see a little bit of different data. You can see the histories, you can see log files. So, if you're trying to
Oh, yeah.
troubleshoot a backup job, the log files are there. We don't expose all that. So that's why I say it's a good 90%. But if you have a backup job fail, you're gonna have to jump over to see why. Did
Yeah.
it have an issue with the snapshot? Did it have an issue, accessing the VM data or something like that? But that's too much data to push over to the
Yeah, sure.
portal side, I
I
think.
agree. Yeah. And what about provider? Is there a provider view, or is that
There is
all in Cohesity?
No, the provider view, and there is a provider view in the HTML5. It's very slim because they don't need to do a lot, right? Once they've set up the mappings, they have to go into that view to just do a new mapping, right? If they fire up a new tenant, they have
Mhm.
to fire up the org, they have to fire up the org on both sides and then map it in VCD. We'll show that, but it's a lot less in the VCD provider view. The provider probably will do more on the Cohesity side because they're going to be troubleshooting or managing the storage backend, or trying to figure out if jobs are failing, or they'd have to configure the policies and then map all that stuff to the users, or even add users, like the permissions for users to do cross launch, for example.
Yeah, speaking of that, I mean, I guess one of the important aspects for service providers is how to monetize the solution. So,
Yep.
what aspects of Cohesity, or what features does Cohesity provide to enable metering, that type of service for
Yeah,
provider?
there is functions there through the APIs. I actually had this conversation with one of the guys who leads what's called their FTD organization, the field technical directors. There's actually been some scripts that have been built to pull the metering and do some chargeback and billing, because we are actually. It's interesting because we have to figure out what they want to bill for. Meaning,
Yeah,
hey, once you've done the backup, so we won't even get into, all of the stuff that we're doing on the back end for compression and dedupe and all that other stuff. But how much are they actually using on the Cohesity platform, right? So how are you charging them by the terabyte? Are you charging them by the VM? There's a number of ways they can do it. So, our tech teams have actually worked with providers to figure out like what's the best way to bill it, and then pull that data through the APIs or through reports so that they can back charge.
that's
At the end
great.
of the day, if they're backing up the same group of VApps, every hour, there's the change rate might be so small that they're not really adding to the back end platform storage on our side. So, their charges could be fairly incremental and low depending on what the provider's charging. But it is all there. The reporting is all there on our side to see how much they've actually ingested, how much they're using, how much they've deduped. So they could actually spit all that back out as a report.
Right. Yeah, that. I mean, that's really good, because a lot of challenges providers have is, just going to market and building the service is
Right.
quite hard, right? Working out what to meter, how to meter, what frequency, is it competitive, is the price point right, and all that sort of stuff is really hard work. And any help that you guys have out of the box for that is going to really be appreciated.
Yeah, it's all going to come in the reporting. I think for us, you know, and I'm just off the top of my head, I think most service providers that we're looking at are using both products. They're probably metering on how much actual storage the customer is using and how much retention they have, right?
Yeah.
Because they could also enable cloud archive retention in the product. So they could create a policy that says, hey, guy, your tenant has these regular policies and we've got this custom one, but then you had this one that you want to have, you know, 7 years of retention. But by the way, that 7 years of retention is going to be stored on a cloud provider. Like, we're going to tier it off. So it's going to cost a lot less. You'll still have access to it, but so that changes the whole cost structure, right? Because now you're talking about what's retained on the platform versus what's retained in say, you know, an S3 bucket or something external to the platform. It's going to, you know, provider's cost is going to be lower. So they're going to, I don't even want to look at the spreadsheets. I know people are doing it, but it's all on how they are going to customize it for each tenant, right?
Yeah, sure. And just speaking about S3, is that one of the storage targets out of the box for you guys? Because I know that's always a question we get asked.
It's one. We have every single cloud provider object storage target when the product was launched. So, I mean, every tier of S3, every tier of GCP, every tier of Azure. I mean, it's interesting because we don't care, right? We want to provide the targets, and the targets are more for that external or the long-term retention, right? We can tier the product. Like, a provider could actually tier our platform out to an S3 bucket or something else and sort of extend the file system. But most guys don't do that. They just kind of do it as the external target for long-term retention. Hey, let's just stick it out. If you need something stored for 7 years, we're not going to store it on the platform on expensive storage. That just doesn't make any sense.
You're not relying on it being a regular recovery, so it's
no, it's usually more it's usually more around a regulation, right? They just have to know that they have it out there and prove that they have it, but they're going to keep, you know, say 30 days or whatever the contract is with the service provider and the tenant. Hey, we'll keep, and they can customize all of that based on each tenant's policy and just say, hey, we'll keep yours for 30 days. If you need longer for immediate recovery, then we can charge accordingly, or we can, you know, work out a different contract. But that's all going to come down to contracts and terms of service.
All right, cool. Well, let's get into it then. Let's have a quick look around the solution itself. And
yeah, let me move some windows around here. So, you know, the old dual screen. No
worries. While you're doing that, so what is the support matrix? What versions of VCD do you support today?
It's like you and I practice this.
Look at that.
So actually, there's a couple things today. Everything about the extension is currently residing in GitHub on our Cohesity GitHub page. There's actually just started some internal talks to sort of either migrate it or at least keep copies of it in our support portal. Possibly if there's stuff that VMware does for partners, you know, to link back to it. Those kinds of things we'll talk about over time. But today, this is where it is. They actually just cleaned this up for me because I asked them to. So it's a very simple matrix, but it does support all the way up through 10.2. So you and I had this conversation a little while back. Yeah. Like any other support matrix, though, and you know this better than anybody at VMware, there's the VCD version, then there's the various versions of the Cohesity cluster software, right? So this matrix kind of gets a little bit confusing because of our dot releases, and just for everybody, you know, who's watching, a CPD just means a hotfix patch. So today, what we're going to show today is actually, I believe, 10.1 with a slightly older version of the plugin, but the functionality is the same. I just didn't want to, a week before this call, I didn't want to go messing with upgrades and, you know, then have something in the environment crash. But it is officially support. Yeah. And actually what we'll do is I posted a couple of videos on our YouTube channel that show what we're going to see today. I'm going to do an update one because the next release of the plugin, I think this week, is actually making some UI enhancements. So I'm going to do sort of a quick, hey, this is what's changed video. I don't want to record them all, but now for everybody watching, it's fully supported up 10.2, and part of our new relationship, trying to work close with you, is to get that day zero support going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Absolutely. That's a big target for us. Make sure we release and you're not, 6 months out or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that has been a little, I'll be honest with everybody who's watching, it has been a little bit of a struggle, but now that you and I are connected, and, you know, Ari, and there's, you know, a bunch of other folks on the back end, I think we'll be able to make that happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very good. Okay, cool. So let's have a look
So
in the VCD. Yeah.
yeah, so let's so I've zoomed in a little bit, so hopefully it'll come out on
Yeah,
the
that's
video.
great.
So the what happens basically, actually, let me go back to this. The installation is very simple, and I won't cover the full installation, but it's it's a PHP script that we run. You download the zip file, you give it, you fill out 3 or 4 things in a config file for your VCD location, username, password, stuff like that.
Yeah.
We basically register it as a plugin, and once it's registered, customers. So I'm actually logged in as the provider right now. So it will actually enable this data protection in the dropdown. So this wouldn't normally be here. If you go into your environment, you won't see that. So it enables this. So if we click over to that, this is the provider. This is all the provider's view is of the VCD side. So essentially, we have a few settings. So tenants can, or providers can actually white label it. So they can show the Cohesity logo, they can hide it, they can put their own logo in. That was actually a feature ask from a couple of service providers that we put into the product. And which clusters they have access to. It's very, very simple configuration, which is nice. Everything, by the way, everything about Cohesity is we try to make stuff simple. When we go to add, so a provider can add any number of Cohesity clusters. So they may have, multiple Cohesity clusters and multiple data centers. When they go to add one, and we won't add it completely, but they just give it a base name, the DNS name for the Cohesity cluster, the domain they want to log in with, and username and password. And once it's registered, it looks like this one, which I will bring up, which is already connected. It's where you can actually see the mappings. So when you first connect to the system, the provider would see all of the VCD tenants on this side and the Cohesity tenants on the right side, and you simply map those. So what I've already done here, and you can tell whenever I personally do demos, we do a lot of Marvel stuff. So we've got Stark Industries and Rand Corporation. Now these have already been mapped. So this is what it was. What it looked like in the VCD side. This is what it looks like on the Cohesity side. If we want, we will probably have to jump over. We talked about jumping over the Cohesity side to see what the tenant view looks like over there. But and then there's Cohesity usernames. These can be local usernames in our system. They can be AD integrated for the purposes of what we've set up. They're local within the Cohesity system. So this is it. Like, this is why I always like to show the provider view, because if they've got the org in VCD and they create the org in Cohesity, they go into the screen and they map it. And if there's a new ones that show up, then this will refresh and we can map new tenants, right? They can just edit this whole setting.
And it's literally just a matter of just clicking the map button and you're done.
Yep, right? That's it. Wow, that's it. And then you do that with any number of clusters that you have, throughout the environment, because obviously they may be splitting clusters. They may have different VCD cells spread around. I mean, there's a number of ways to do this. So that's the provider view of VCD. Just to map that, or kind of you look at it over on the Cohesity side. This is our dashboard within the Cohesity backend. But when you enable multi-tenancy on the platform, and what I will tell people who are watching this is, and most people who know me know I don't really BS a lot. If you're going to try this, if you're a service provider who has Cohesity and you're not running the integration, or you haven't turned on organizations, do this in a staging environment, or do it on what we call a VE, a virtual edition. And the reason being is, on a Cohesity platform, once you enable organizations, you can't disable them by design, because the whole point is, and there's a lot of stuff in VCD that's done this over the past, once you enable something, it's always there, because once you add an organization, you can't delete the organization, because then there could be downstream effect, right, as a provider. So just fair warning, if you haven't enabled it, just do it in a test environment. Anybody with our software license can download a virtual edition and use it as a test bed.
This is essentially, then, when you enable organizations, it's essentially turning on multi-tenancy.
Yes.
Would that be correct?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Yep.
So it's a toggle, right? The toggle's already been turned on. And then once you bring that in, once you do that, it'll enable this organizations button, where we can basically go ahead and add new organizations. This is the only information we add in our system, is a name, a short name, which would usually match something on your side, and then a description if we want it. Once they've been added here, they could automatically be mapped over if we wanted to, or in most cases, what the provider will do is they'll actually go in and start putting custom policies. They'll add users and groups in. You'll notice this particular one has, gold, silver, bronze, and a custom Stark policy. We can do VLANs. We have a hybrid extender functionality that allows service providers that are doing DR as a service to have a customer running Cohesity on their end use the hybrid extender, which is basically a secure connector back to their environment without using VPN. So we do have customers using this, as a straight up service provider. We then we always add the source for VCD. So that source only gets added once. So if you've got multiple VCD environments that are different URLs, we add those as sources, right? So everything comes into Cohesity as a source. So it's 2 steps: add the VCD source, enable, 3 steps: add VCD source, enable organizations, create the org.
So this is quite, sorry, this didn't occur to me earlier, but it's actually just occurred to me. It takes a little while to get the cogs going.
Yeah.
But this is actually quite interesting. So you can then become a backup provider of backup services and have no storage of your own, and utilize other service providers for all of your backup requirements.
Possibly, yeah, if I'm hearing it right.
Okay. It's just when you're showing down below the
extender,
the network, the hybrid extender piece, that really enables you then to do a lot of data movement from your environment to another environment, or from a customer environment to another environment.
Customer environment to the provider environment. Yeah. So they would the customer would be a Cohesity customer on their side, and they could. There was a group down in Florida that was doing this a lot. He's a friend of mine who no longer works there, but they were a VCD customer. They used VCD with Cohesity, but then they also had customers that had Cohesity on premises, and they were using this hybrid extender just for that customer to do DR as a service over to them.
Okay.
They weren't necessarily even hosting they weren't hosting their environment within VCD as a provider. They offered multiple services, right? So DR as a service via Cohesity was just one service they offered. So the hybrid extender just allows the communication through a secure channel.
But I could use, so not the hybrid extender then, but I could actually use Cohesity as a service provider and deliver backup services to my VCD customers, but then be backing up to completely different environments, right?
It depends. So I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding the question. So let's take that use case. So you're a provider running VCD with Cohesity, so they have all the stuff we're showing plus self-service. Are you then saying the provider needs to back up to someone else?
Yes. Well, provider, no, so the backup goes, Cohesity orchestrates the backup, but the backup actually ends up on a different platform.
No, and actually we wouldn't do that because our platform is so scalable that it just keeps scaling out. What we could do, and this may be the transition, is we can move data to other tiers, if that makes sense. So we could, if somebody needed longer retention, we can push it out to a cloud provider or an object storage array, and say, hey, it's a bank, they need 7 years. It's a US bank, they need 7 years of retention. We're not going to store that on our platform, but we'll actually archive that data via Cohesity over to an external target.
Okay, right. Yeah. That's. I told you I'd ask you a silly question. That was probably the only one, actually.
No. It's all right. I just want to make sure we're on the same page and I don't say something that's not really true. So really, just to back up a quick second, I said we have to register a source. We register multiple sources, but we treat VCD as a hypervisor source. So you just provide the base credentials to connect to VCD first. Once it's connected to VCD, you can enable the orgs and the multi-tenancy, and then you can start creating the orgs and mapping them. So it really is, for provider, it's 3 basic steps to start doing the integration once they've installed the plugin on the other side. The biggest thing that I think they have control over is the policies. So you could see here, there's standard policies that are pushed down to multiple organizations, which could be their stock policies. Every customer who's, for example, service provider says, every customer who comes on board with us, we give basic backup functionality to all of them. Maybe it's one policy and it's just every 24 hours, you have access to that policy to back up whatever VMs you want. And the tenant can control it, and we'll show that. They may come back and say, well, that's great, but we need something more custom. Well, you can see here, they're a little bit different. These custom policies are backing up every hour and retaining for 2 weeks, right? Where gold is backing up every 4 hours and retaining for 1 week. So this is what the provider does. They assign it to the org that is going to have access to it. So you can see only Rand has access to the Rand policy, only Stark has access to the Stark, but both organizations have access to the base 3.
And I'm assuming, so yeah, that works. And I'm assuming the metering can be done then on a policy type and consumption of the policy, number of units of a policy that's been executed?
Yeah, it would probably be done through the APIs via the reporting API,
Right.
where the provider could pull, they could actually pull a lot of the data that shows in the dashboard, right? By org, they could show, how much data is being used, what the reduction is, how much storage is in use by that particular tenant. It's all there, and we
Yeah.
store all of that information. We also store the performance if they wanted to charge for ingress and egress and all those other pieces into the platform, which I think to date, I've seen most companies, most service providers are going at least based on storage utilization. How much storage is tenant A using versus tenant B, right?
Okay.
And I believe if we go in here through organizations, it's shown in the UI, but this is all you can extract all this by the APIs as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
And you get trends too, which is nice. And actually we've just added more reporting in the last release that's not in this particular one that I'm showing, but that we just keep expanding on the reporting.
Okay.
So that's the provider kind of view of both sides, right? So let's jump back over to VCD and actually show the tenant view. So I'll actually go and impersonate Danny Rand here. And this is, I think, what is the most powerful to the service providers. And even I think when I did the YouTube videos, I focused on this a little bit more because this is what's important. It's always about self-service. The reason providers exist is so they can provide a service and the tenants can go in and do a bunch of stuff and they can charge accordingly for it, right?
Yeah.
So just like the other view, if we go to more, there's now a data protection tab that wouldn't be there normally. And if the tenant actually opens this up, this is where it gets a little bit cool because we actually show how many VMs have been protected, how many total VApps they have, how many Cohesity clusters that their tenant's been attached to. It's just some basic information in the overview. What the tenant can then do is they can go down this list, and if we look at VApps and VMs, it actually shows what's protected and what's not protected. So they can go in and change this on the fly and say, I want to actually go ahead and protect this VM, or I want to auto protect the whole VApp at the VApp level. So there is that distinction between the VM and the VApp. They can also unprotect it. They can come in here and say, you know what? No, I'm done with this one. Stop protecting it and just nuke the protection on the whole thing. This will send the API calls back over to the Cohesity side and say, basically remove these objects from the backup job. If they wanted to add something in, so let's just say we're going to go ahead and auto protect, or actually, I just want to protect this one VM. We'll basically get a quick dialogue that says, hey, do you want to add it to an existing group? So this protection group is already running under the gold policy. Or do you want to create a new protection group? And which policy do you want to use? And you'll notice, remember I said there was 3 standard ones and then a custom one? You have that the tenant has access to all of that. So as long as they know what they're paying for each one, they can pick the custom policy and call this test group and go ahead and fire this off at whatever start time they want. And this will actually start the backup job over on the Cohesity side under that policy. And now it'll actually show that VM is now protected. Okay. The restores, I'll pause there. Is there questions? I mean, this is so simple. It's amazing to me, right? When I saw this integration, I was like, this is cool.
Yeah, definitely. It's nice to have that one place as well. But what really appeals to me here is the protect the whole VApp or auto discover, because I think that's where traditionally backups have, when you're configuring lots of infrastructure, and particularly if you're doing infrastructure as code, you kind of forget about the backups. So if you're doing infrastructure as code and you need to auto protect VApps and all the VMs and configuration of the VApp as well, this is fantastic.
As long as the VApp doesn't get deleted, right? So to your point, if you're doing infrastructure as a code and you've deployed the VApp and then you're just changing the VMs within the VApp and you do like this one is auto protected at the VApp level, any VMs we add to that VApp will automatically get picked up by the next run of the backup job. Yes, you are correct.
Sure. Yeah, I think that for me is fantastic, because I think that just, the sheer proliferation of VMs that we're seeing at the moment and containers running on VMs as well, just really points to the need to be able to auto protect by default.
Yep. So this is the first view, right? And again, if the provider has connected them to multiple clusters, they can see which cluster it's being backed up to. I mean, they don't necessarily need to even know that, but it's there. Mm-hmm. Now here's where it gets really nice as well is backing up everything either auto protected is one thing, but we actually give the tenant the ability to restore an individual VM, the entire VApp, or search for individual files and folders in the index. Yeah, so again, it doesn't matter to us. So if we just go to the VM list, when we do everything, we do searches based on Google, what we call Google like search, right? So you can, if you know the name of the VM you're looking for, or you can put in wildcards, it doesn't matter. These are the VMs that have been backed up, and they tell you the groups, right? So this is the new one we just created, that test group VM. We've got this health data protection group. And people can mix and match, but let's say we want to actually go ahead. Let me grab one of these old ones. I want to grab this VM, not the VApp, just this. I don't want to restore the whole VApp. I just want to do something with one of the VMs that was in there. To your point, infrastructure as a code was deployed, something went south. I just need to look at an old version. So if I hit continue, there's a couple options we won't even get into, but recover to a new location is obvious. You can send it to a new org VDC. If that tenant has multiple org VDCs, you can send it to a new VApp. In this case, we'll just leave it. You can decide to attach and detach networks. You can power it on. You can continue on error, things like that. Okay. I think that's the one little UI thing that when you click one, the other one doesn't actually on highlight. There's a couple of UI changes they're making. Here's what's really cool, at least to me. This is the entire backup snapshot history in our system all the way back to when the retention would end. So I believe this one was a 2-week retention this actually goes all the way back to October. So I have one of these set to go very way back. Yeah. And that was on purpose. So we could show this, right? But I could literally pick any one of these snapshots from any given day and any given time point, and it will restore that version. So there's one thing that Cohesity does on the platform that's fairly unique is we keep all of the backup images as fully hydrated images. So think about it this way. When you first start the backup job of the VM or the VApp, we take a day 0 snapshot and a backup, which is a full, right? Mm-hmm. When we do our incremental backup, we automatically merge that incremental data with a zero cost clone of the original full backup and merge the two as a fully hydrated image. So now you've got a full backup, you've got a very small version of the incremental, but it's also a full image. And we rinse and repeat that. So every single one of these is an instant restore because they're all essentially considered fully hydrated images with all of the incremental data already associated with it.
That's nice. That's a really good feature. So you do your incremental backups, you do them really quick, and in the background you rehydrate them or with a clone
within the system. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's awesome.
So this will actually kick off the restore. And if we had access to vCenter, which, I don't want to do it for purposes of this, we'd actually see the restore happening and all the stuff that we do normally behind the scenes. Sure. The other thing is we can do it by VApp. So again, it's the same kind of structure. We can see every snapshot of the VApp that's there. It's all exactly the same information. It's just whether we're restoring one VM or VApp. And files and folders wise, this is pretty powerful. We can search for specific paths, or we can search for, it's in the wrong window, .txt. And since we're doing this live, we'll see if it comes up with anything. Yeah, it did. So the other thing we do is when we take every single backup, full, incremental, all of that, the last part of the process is we index everything on the VM. So we essentially have a method where we open the VMDK file, we index all of the information, and then we present it back as searchable indexing. So if somebody had a VM with a VApp and they just had a config file or something that got corrupted, they don't have to restore the whole VM. They can literally just go and find the particular file that they need on that system and actually just go ahead and grab it and restore that single file from, again, same snapshot tree, same history. And this is all based on what the policy was. This is an hourly policy. We can, actually, this is the 4-hour policy. We can tell because it's 1 to 5. They can restore it to the server or they can actually download it directly to their desktop. Nice. Right. So they don't even have to go through the whole restoration process just to get a file or an individual folder.
Can you limit that search to, at the moment you're searching all servers? Would you do that through the filter on the UI drop down there, or would you do it from a wildcard?
You could do it by the path. So if you actually know the path, it's not going to filter by the server. Most customers, if they have the same path and multiple servers, they are going to have to filter it down a little bit by using this filter button here, or they can find that path and then filter by server name. So
that's
can just do THDB.
Yeah.
So you can narrow the scope for sure.
Yeah.
Because if you
That's
have a lot of
awesome.
VMs with the same files, but we have customers that use this all the time. You get a patch that goes bad, or you roll a piece of code as infrastructure as code, and you can just go grab the file and put it back, right? Without restoring the whole machine, which is a lot faster.
It's super fast. I mean, that's one of the things I'm really impressed with. The speed of this thing is incredible.
Yeah. So this recovery is still showing that it's running, and I'll explain why in a second. These are past recoveries, so you can see we don't give all the gory details of the logging information in this UI, which is okay. But what we do allow under this advanced tab is what we call cross launch. So if I actually click that cluster name, it's going to actually link me over to, as the tenant, over to the Cohesity back end, so that I can actually do a little bit more investigation if I needed to. So I can actually go look at my protection jobs. This is the test group we just set up. We can see that the backup ran, but if I wanted to dig into the logging information, I could do so, right? So this is all the gory backend logs and things that people may need. I can also see more detail on my recoveries that are running. And you'll see that this recovery says it's still running, but let me quickly go back over here. That VM was available within about 30 seconds. And the reason is the way we do restores is we present the storage to vSphere, we activate the VM, and we mount that on our file system. And that process that's running in the back end is a storage vMotion. So the reason that's actually taking, it still doesn't show that it's complete, is it's just finishing the storage vMotion to move it back to, because we said original location.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So you're mounting it on your side really super quickly.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, that's
so.
smart.
If I had powered this on, actually, I could power this on, and even though that backup set, the recovery says it's still running, I could power this on and interact with it and do everything else that I needed to. But it is running, and actually, if we wanted to, just for argument's sake, let's be the real provider here for a second, because I have access to all of it. If we actually log into, if we log into the vSphere side, and let me just zoom that in a little bit, we'll actually see that storage vMotion running, and we'll actually see that it's running a relocation job. And that relocation job is, ignore all of this garbage that's in here. I got a lot of stuff in my environment. That is up here. So if we look at that group that's being restored to, and we find that VM, the reason I want to point this out is it's fairly interesting to see on the details. You'll actually notice that the storage that it's mounted to is a Cohesity appliance.
Yeah.
And when it's done, it will get storage vMotion. It's basically finishing. We mounted this volume specifically for the recovery. The only VM that's on there is this one. And when the storage vMotion is done, we'll unmount that volume. So the VM is instantly available. That's one of our claims to fame, is that we provide instant access.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That is a really cool feature. Really cool feature.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I like that a lot. Okay. Anything else to
see
in the tenant UI then? That's about it.
No, I think we kind of hit everything in the menu. We did the cross launch piece, so you can see all of the details. It's really something that if people haven't actually tried it as a provider, they're going to find that we don't charge for the plugin. I guess I should mention that. Like it's on GitHub. They can go download it. They could register the plugin with most providers have a staging environment for VCD as well as for their production environment. So they could load the plugin into their staging environment. They could stand up a staging Cohesity virtual edition and actually play with mapping these integrations and see how well it works. It takes a lot to impress me, and it's been 20 something years in IT. So I was first impressed by watching my first vMotion. We all were, right? Watching that VM move. When I came to Cohesity and started working with the VCD integration with my Cloud Director background, I was like, this is really nice. Like this is a really good integration. It's well done. It gives the provider and the tenant everything they need. It frees up provider resources to go do other stuff and not do all of these basic functions that we just showed, even getting a file. The provider's out of that work stream now.
Yeah. And it's just it's a very complete, very fast, thorough service they can provide as a service.
Right.
And you don't have to train anyone in this. This is basic. If you can make your way around, you make your way around VCD, you can do this.
Yes, exactly. And you can do all of these things. Yeah, you can literally, and you can even see it's already found the new VM that we restored. and it's not discovered yet because there's processes that run for it to show as discovered. But eventually we could reprotect that one if we wanted to. There's just it's very efficient in what it does, and we found that the providers using both have actually had really, really good success. We do a lot of demos for providers that are already a VCD customer, and maybe we're trying to sell them Cohesity. This is one of the first things we show them, and we say, have you seen this integration? It does a lot for you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very nice, especially the speed of backup. I know how frustrating it is. Typically waiting for a backup to recover is a huge wait normally, because it's normally quite a lot of data. And equally, being able to offer that as a service, so it's just really simple for someone to kind of go in there and do it themselves is brilliant, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and that's something if you have, if you not on a recorded call, you just wanted to actually see the back end process for the recovery. I could show you that anytime on our monthly calls, but it's good to see it because it's the same function. Like it's just the VCD integration is just providing that view to the tenant, but what happens on the back end is what Cohesity does all the time. Like it's just how we recover, and we do those recoveries. We do those recovery demos in batches of 50 or 100 or even larger. Like I've done 100 VM restores, and the 100 VMs become available in about 30 seconds each. It's cyclical. So if you're a provider, the same thing's going to happen, and the user can interact with them. The storage vMotion, I can't control that. That takes a little bit longer on 100 VMs to start migrating all that data, right? So the actual process may take an hour to finish, but in today's world, and we talk about this a lot, it doesn't matter what the backup does. It's all about recovery, especially with ransomware and cyber attacks. It's like, I just need to get access to the VM as fast as possible, or I need to restore different versions of it because maybe I don't know which one is infected, which one do I go back to? If you're running continuous data protection, you may have, slivers of increments you could go back versus if you're running every hour. There's so much stuff that people don't think about when it comes to recovery operations today. Like I still see people only backing up once every day. It's like, you're going to lose 24 hours of data if you get hit by a ransomware attack, man. Like I don't even do that at home. I think my stuff at home backs up every hour.
Yeah, I mean, there's another conversation to have for another time, and maybe we should have another session on this. Is the blurring line of DR and backup? Because in today's world, and what I've just seen is pretty much instantaneous recovery. It's just the time to boot on because you're doing the storage vMotion back in. You've effectively got snapshots ready and waiting. So it is a DR kind of solution if you're doing it at the relative cadence for a DR snapshot.
Yeah. The bigger thing I think people always get into the confusion point is DR versus business continuity, right? There's a difference. Totally, that's a whole different conversation. I love when people blur those lines because I also have some SRM background from my VMware days. So
business continuity is a totally different thing. DR service, that amount of it is in the business continuity. The rest of it is people and process. All right. Well, listen, hey, thank you very much for showing us today. I think it's great. I think you've shown me absolutely everything, and I'm sure that's been really educational for people who haven't seen this before. Super pleased to see 10.2 support. So that's really exciting as well. And a new version of plugin coming out.
And with your help, we'll have day zero support going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. you can count on that. So Chris, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And you mentioned some YouTube videos at the beginning. Let's make sure we get a copy of those so we can put them into the description.
I'll email. I was going to ask you that. If you can put the links in the description, I'll send you a bunch of links to those videos so you can. And usually it always ends with, what if I have additional questions? The world we live in with service providers is certainly much smaller than the overall customer world. So apparently there's a thunderstorm coming through. Hopefully my house doesn't get electrocuted again. Go ahead and you can, my Twitter handle's at C Colotti. I'm willing to, help folks out. Part of my role as field CTO is being global. So, people shouldn't have an issue standing it up, but like most people know how to find me and I can at least, point them in the right direction if we have to. Perfect. So more than willing to do that as well. So I will get you the links for sure to put in the description.
Thanks, Chris. And listen, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Cheers.